Thank you, everybody. I want to thank Erin for this amazing invitation to do this amazing installation, and it's been such a treat working with you and during this last year conceptualizing this work and kind of like just all the conversations and all the great kind of like exchanges that we had over the last year leading up to this exhibition. And I also want to thank my Miami gallery, David Castillo Gallery, for all the support, and Claudia Matos for all the great, like all the amazing kind of like logistic kind of like work that goes into making an installation like this. And also to Christy and Bill Gautreaux for being like the main sponsors of this exhibition. This installation kind of like is kind of like maybe like the 5th or 6th incarnation of something like this that happened in an institution, and every time it kind of like manifests itself, it always kind of like has a very like, it always grabs from what's going on in the museum, and also kind of like excavates the collection, or there's like something that triggers like inspiration, and then I kind of like combine it all together to create these, kind of like immersive experiences. I'm gonna talk to you guys about the first time that one of these installations happened was in Miami at Locust Projects. There is an alternative space, and this is the first time that I kind of like was experiencing working with fabric. And one of the things that happened to me was that around this time, kind of like was around the time that I kind of like had like my anniversary of living in Miami, because I work and live in Miami. And I kind of felt that there was like this kind of, all this history of all this work that, that I had done, So like there was all this work that I've been doing for the last 15 to 20 years, and I felt that there was all this collage work that I'd done, and I had the opportunity, I had the access to access these kind of technology that creates fabric. So I've always been obsessed with fashion, so I'm a collector, so I collect fashion, I also collect objects, so I think that's something that I kind of like creates my practice. And having the access to this technology is like kind of like a technology that is intended for like aspiring fashion designers. So what I did when I was getting ready for this show, and also like there was this exhibition was in a very small space. So, and the space was kind of like really kind of like rough. It was kind of like very kind of like industrial, right? And I kind of like I kind of like hated the space. I kind of like wanted to like kind of like transform the space, and all this kind of like all these dudes had like done all these like exhibits there that were like kind of like very kind of like macho. They were kind of like they were very kind of like rough, and I kind of like wanted to cover the whole space. I wanted to queer the space, like transform it completely from head to toe. So I kind of wanted to come in and like just build walls, like do like kind of like cover it with rug and everything. So when I send the files, because I have so many files of all my kind of like imagery, I got back, like this humongous like roll of like all this yardage of fabric that was like humongous, and I kind of like, that was the first time that I had access to the fabric, and that I was like actually like gonna like make an installation with the fabric, because it was like kind of like this like amazing material that I could just like transform into all these different kind of like elements for the installation. So there was like definitely like the wall was created, and also like these soft sculptures that kind of like like they were like taking over the gallery, so you actually had to like walk around them, like so you couldn't really like kind of like move in the space, being like confronted with the work. So I think in a way like I kind of like involved like the the visitor into the like kind of like make it kind of like be like part of the work in a way, like kind of like hug the visitor, like kind of like he really had to get through all of these like kind of like space. Of course, I wasn't satisfied with only covering the whole space with the fabric and creating like this like kind of like sub-sculpture. So I also created some new works in the space. And also one of the new developments in the work around this time in 2017 was the creation of these assemblage works. So I have always like created like this kind of collage works that were like they were like paper, so they were like collages that were made out of like paper, and they were like three-dimensional. And then this is the first time that I started using objects in the work. So they become more like sculptural, and also, but they had like a lot of influence from like when I was working making like the collage work. And also in the exhibition there was also like kind of like bits and pieces of different works that were exhibited before in Miami, but in different ways. So this was like the first time that I did this. So that was kind of like the first time that I did something that involved technology. So this is like digital printing the fabric. So I'm like always worked like analog. So there's always been like this kind of like very like kind of like I had to like really let go and like do something a little bit different from like what I usually do. This exhibition was called Man of the Night. And so it was 2017. Then after that, I got invited to do an exhibition at Mattress Factory in Pittsburgh. And when I went to do a site visit, they assigned me the space where the show was going to be. And this is a very interesting museum because the person that founded the museum, she's a collector, so she kind of like in the top floor of the museum, her is the where she lives, where she has her house. So she has, if you go into her house, it's like a kind of like a Wunderkammer, so it's kind of like a cabinet of curiosity. So that she is like kind of like collects everything from like Art Deco to dolls to like art. So everything is together. So when I visited, I was very fascinated by her room, by her house. And also, there is also like an installation by Greer Lacton. He's an artist from the 80s, East Village. And she has this installation called It's All About Me, Not You. And I really love these kind of like figures. They're about sexuality, they're about fashion, they're about the body. So I kind of like felt that they had like a lot of affinity with some of my figures, like the paprika figures. So when I was like getting ready for this exhibition, I kind of like got really kind of like influenced by her, and I started like kind of like making like these figures like be like a little bit more sexual. They had like all of these like leather elements and like kind of like fashion, like the belts, and there was like all of these kind of like. So all of this was like because I was like kind of like thinking about Greer, and I was thinking about her life, and I started like actually like looking, like doing a lot of research about her, and I kind of like getting obsessed with her, kind of like, you know, kind of like I almost kind of like wish I would like met Greer, and I would have, she owned a store called Einstein's that was like this like very important store in New York in the 80s, and I imagined myself kind of like, you know, going to Einstein's and kind of like seeing Greer like doing like windows, because she used to do like the display in the windows, and that was something that she was like obsessed with. And like in the Christmas time, there will be like this kind of like very insane window, and I love also like kind of like window displays. So I think there was definitely like this kind of obsession with Greer when I was working doing my show Dragonfruit for Mattress Factory. So this is when you come into Mattress Factory. So I kind of like, again, was like dealing with like this space that was kind of like very industrial and very kind of like dark and stuff. So I wanted to kind of like covered it with like this lime green rug, and kind of like cover all the walls with fabric. One of the interesting things that I did with this fabric version is that I brought in some small sculptures of my work, and I inserted them into the collection of the founder in the top floor. And then I took photos of that, and then I kind of like, that's how with those images I printed the fabric. It was very interesting because there was like an elevator in the space, and when the elevator opened the doors, you were like immersed in this like installation. So it was kind of like something that you weren't expecting. So then when the doors open, you will be like kind of like, you know, coming into this kind of like immersive installation. And Mattress Factory is kind of like well known for doing installations of artists. So I think you kind of like, there's a lot of different versions of like what people do at Mattress Factory, and it's expected to be like this like, kind of like where you take over the space and you kind of like build the installation while you are in Pittsburgh. So you usually like are in Pittsburgh for like a month, and you kind of like spend all this time kind of like building the work on site. So that's one of the things that they specialize on. So there's this one of these three-dimensional collages that I kind of like also am known for, where there's like they're like made out of paper, and all of these kind of like little miniature kind of like trinkets that I find like in thrift stores and flea markets and all sort of places. So this is kind of like they become like a cabinet of curiosities. So there's a lot of like this like kind of like layering, and there's also like this kind of like shelving that happens in those pieces. So like I create like this like little shelves, and then I like kind of like collect a lot of things along the way. So these kind of pieces are like the kind of pieces that could go for months and months of like kind of like building up like these kind of like very dense. A lot of things get like covered up, so there starts to be happening like some layering. Also like similar the way that a painter does it with oil paint. After doing Mattress Factory, and one of a curator in Miami teased me about kind of like coming into the museum and using the permanent collection as material to make an installation. You know, I always dream about doing that, about like kind of like you know, like mining the collection of the museum the same way that I mine the thrift stores, and kind of like going into the vault and kind of like having like free range to use all these different kind of like objects that are from like different eras and from different artists. Some artists in this installation I was familiar with, and I kind of like admire, and maybe also like there were kind of like artists that I really was that I felt that I had a lot of affinities with. Other artists I didn't know about, so I kind of like learned about them in the process of making the installation. But of course, I wasn't going to do kind of like a traditional hanging that a curator would do. So I kind of like took over the space with fabric that I created specially for the exhibition. So this is like a kind of like an installation that I created, like using some of my fabric and also using two works on paper by the artist Carlos Alfonso, who is a Cuban artist who died of HIV in the 1990s, and that I never got to meet. But I always heard about him living in Miami, because I've been living in Miami for 20 years. So I always actually feel like I always live with his work, and that I'm always around his work in Miami. So it was an honor to kind of like include him in the show. And then I wanted to do something a little bit more daring, and kind of like place some of my fabric underneath and place one of his paintings on top of my work. So I kind of like was like starting to kind of like take the pieces and create assemblages, you know, with the collection. So I kind of like really, I mean, the curator was very nervous, so I was kind of like starting to like, kind of like treat this hanging like I would treat my work. So there's like this section over here who also has the Cuban artist Manuel Mendive and Edouard Duval-Carrier. So this is also some artists that are kind of like pretty well known in Miami. There is also some objects in the collection that were more kind of like these like unknown kind of like statues and things, and I also like was playing with them and like kind of like placed them in front of some of the installs. And there was also, I also found this frame in the collection that I decided that I wanted to transform it into a mirror. So, and then after, I was kind of like very like inspired by Frida Kahlo, she has a portrait where she places a mirror next to her portrait, and she gave it to a friend, so the friend will see herself in the mirror every time she would see the portrait. So I kind of wanted the visitor to kind of like see themselves in the mirror, and then kind of like experience all these artists that also make figures and faces and masks. So there was there were pieces by Rufino Tamayo and by some of the Cuban vanguard painters also in there. Also kind of like doing like a paying homage to my own work, I kind of decided to make like an oversized plexi box, a material that I always encase my work in. But in this instance, I kind of like took all these objects from the permanent collection and did like a kind of like a composition. But that was like, for example, like these collectors who had donated a collection of malachite objects to the museum. And so that was already a collection on itself. So I brought in a collection that somebody else already had put together and put it inside this other collection. So I was like starting to play with all these ideas of like display and kind of like, you know, I was also like placing objects on top of objects. So I was kind of like, you know, they were very nervous because they're like, you cannot really put that on top of that. And I was like, kind of like, it was kind of like one of those situations where, you know, I was like, but also like, I think like these objects were given like a new light by being in these displays that I was creating. So they were like, kind of like giving them kind of like this, like a spotlight. I also was interested in like also bringing artwork from very important, you know, like kind of like artists and put it in juxtaposition with like these local artists. So I kind of borrowed this sculpture from a collector of mine, Craig Robbins, and this is like a work by Powell Altamer, and I kind of like placed it next to Purvis Young, who is like an outsider artist that it's a Miami kind of like figure. And I kind of like to do this. I was always mixing the canon also with queer artists, so also with outsider artists, also with artists of color. So I was kind of like placing everybody in the same plane. So I was kind of like trying to be very democratic about the way that, you know, that everything was like in the, you know, like blurring all these hierarchies, you know, in the installation. So after I finished that work, and also like this exhibition at the Tesoro, I kind of spent some time like, you know, thinking about what was going to be the next installation. And one of the things that I did was that one day I went to the thrift store that I kind of like, so this thrift store that I'm obsessed with in Miami that is called Out of the Closet. And I kind of like, I have heard about this figure that existed like, you know, in the 90s in South Beach. There was like this kind of like performer. She was also a painter. And people had shown me pictures, and people were like, oh, you will be interested in like knowing about this artist. But I actually had never really met her because she died also like in the 90s. And then one day I went to the thrift store and I found 2 of her paintings. So I was really fascinated by that, and I immediately bought them. I didn't know what I was going to do with the paintings, and I kind of like put them away in storage. Then this curator invited me to do this exhibition, and then I felt that I kind of like wanted to do something with these paintings and kind of like include them in an installation that kind of like highlight her life, and also do like a 2-person exhibition with her. And maybe she would have liked this, maybe she wouldn't. So this is a portrait that is called I Will Not Die, and this was painted like a year before she died in 1994. So I kind of like did research, and I found all of these kind of like periodicals that she used to write for this magazine called The Wire, and she had like a column that was like a gossip column in the magazine, and she also would do like kind of like all these kind of like illustrations and kind of like interviews with people. So like she was like a very active member of the community in the 90s in South Beach, and kind of like she performed like at different clubs. But she also was really wanted to be taken seriously as a painter. So she was also kind of like worked really hard on being an artist. And she kind of like was collected by people in Miami. People kind of like, you know, supported her work, but she never really got like really famous. So when I got the opportunity to do this massive project at our Basel Meridians, and actually like the convention center where our Basel takes place is in the middle of South Beach. So those were her stomping grounds. So I felt that there was like she would have loved to be part of this like kind of like important exhibition. So I kind of like was doing it as a tribute to her. So I also made like an assemblage, kind of like inspired by Varla for this exhibition. So there was also like another painting in there that's like these that has like different figures. When I came here to the Kemper, Erin showed me the city and a lot of the things here at the museum. But then when I saw this painting, I really fell in love with, also because I've been kind of like, when I kind of like stain the fabric, it kind of like creates like this like pools of color where I like kind of like, you know, do like pour all the paint into the fabric, and then it kind of like sits on the floor, and similar to kind of like the way that like abstract expressionist painters kind of like stain like the canvas. So I felt that this was like a perfect inspiration because I also like the vibrancy of the palette of my work, and also because I kind of wanted to, in between the creating like this kind of like areas of color, I also wanted to like kind of like put in some of my patterns, so kind of like mix it all together to create like this like major like kind of like quilt installation. So I think even, for example, when I was working during creating this installation, I also created other works that are already like rising sun is kind of like affecting. So I feel like this painting was created around the same time. So it's interesting how like all these different artists that I'm inspired by kind of like, you know, they're starting to leave like a mark in the work that I make. So this is something that came right after I made this. So I think it's already kind of like you could see like the influence of Hans Hofmann in this painting, because it's already kind of like informing. So like Varla, Greer Larkin, you know, we have all these artists in Tesoro, all this kind of like, you know, artists that I like look at, they kind of like leave like something that I can take to the next project and becomes now part of the language of the work. So On a Spiral was created in a very interesting way because I was doing a residency in Guadalajara, Mexico. So I was kind of like a collector invited me to be part of this residency, and he owns like this ceramic factory. So I always had worked with objects that are found, but then I had the opportunity to create some objects by hand. So I always kind of like taking all of the ceramics, right, that other people make, or I appropriate all these things that are from unknown creators into my work. So in this case, I was able to go back to making ceramics. So I think some of the elements of these piece here at the Kemper were created in you know, by me. So it's like actually like something new that this piece has that, you know, none of the other pieces have. So this is something that it probably is going to be like now part of the way that I put it together. There's also here some elements that are from Miami. So there's a palm frond. There's also like this penca that is also from Mexico. And then there's also this kind of like palm tree that is part that they use like in for houses. Like they always like, that's like a very traditional kind of like home decor that happens in Florida. So there's also like something very Florida in there. That's part of the thing. So here's some, like, I'm just going to show in some of the pieces that have been done in the last few years. There are like these assemblage with the leather, with the self sculptures, and with the found ceramics. So you can see this one is called holes. This one is called Mothership, and when you come into Tesoro, the exhibition that I curated, I placed this piece in the entrance of the show. So I kind of wanted to, it's called Mothership because I feel that's where everything comes from. So these kind of collages become like these kind of like, they carry all of the language of all, where all the works like comes from. And so these pieces are kind of like also, again, like this, like, kind of like a cabinet of curiosity. Also, like they become like kind of like a collection of masks. So like I create all these different masks, all these elements individually, and then they get added into this collage. Some of a collage like this could be like more like kind of like an ongoing project in the studio. Some of them take like more than like 6 months or a year to make. So it's like, these are made like with encyclopedias, with books, and so sometimes they have like small objects, but actually like these collages kind of like gave me like the roadmap to start making the assemblage, because this is almost became kind of like a sketching kind of like you know, era for my work, where I was like creating everything out of like paper and magazine and book and stuff like that. So I was like interested in all this very ephemeral materials, and then I started moving towards more like all of these elements from the thrift store. So you can see some of the detail here. So it's like also like I paint, like I started painting some paper, so also to bring some kind of like brighter colors into the mix. So because, you know, books and magazines don't have very like bright colors. So I think that's probably also how I started to stain the fabric. This piece is called the sitter. It's also kind of like, this is from 2020. So yeah, so that's like that. Thank you. So I don't know if you guys have questions about any of these projects.
The woman in Miami who died, what was her name?
Her name was Varla.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and she was she was a writer for Wire magazine, but she was a drag queen. She wasn't like, you know, she was a performer. Yeah. Yeah, so
Thank you.
But she was also an artist and a personality and a diva of South Beach. So, yeah. Yes.
How did you first start working with fabric, or what drew you to it?
I was always interested in fabric, but, you know, like years ago, there wasn't really the technology to do it. I mean, the way that it's done now, and especially because all these JPEGs that I had of my work that were from like the early 2000s, they weren't as crisp as these JPEGs that we're using now. So I think that's something that, a development that happened now, that there's the technologies available to me to be able to do it in small quantities. Yeah, so it's kind of like, but I was all ready to use fabric in the work. And when I almost see the fabric as like this element that has the DNA of my work, and that kind of like carries over all these like old work that gets shown again in a different way.
Hi, thank you very much for your talk. It was so exciting. Erin gave us this little teaser about the spiral in your central collage. Could you tell us more about that, please?
Yeah, it's a little bit of an inside story. I was listening to a song when I was working on this piece on repeat a lot, because I really liked the song. And then I found the spiral, and actually that was a lamp. That was a spiral. And also I kind of like, I cut the part that was the lamp, and then I had like this big spring. And I was very fascinated by it because it's plexi. So it's kind of like similar to the material that I use a lot, the plexiglass. And I was listening to this song, and the song said something about like that she was kissed, a spiral kiss or something like that. Like the kiss was a spiral, and I was obsessed with like figuring out what that meant. And then I figured out that maybe what it means is that when you are given a kiss that is really good, that your whole body kind of like shakes that you feel it from your head to your feet. So because it kind of like goes like down into your body. So I think I was thinking about that sort of thing, you know. So, but also the object, you know, the object is very fascinating to me, and it was part of. It was a great find. Actually, you're pretty good. That was the impetus to create the piece. So I always have one amazing object that kind of like starts that gets the thing going.
So thank you, Pepe. This is fantastic. The direction of your artwork, you're assembling other people's artwork now, and I've seen maybe some artists, they start to deconstruct other people's artwork, or you're busy including your clothing and your collectibles, and you're starting to take them apart. So is that a direction you're going to go? I mean, it sounds painful to take your objects, things that you love, and to kind of break them apart and reassemble them.
As a collector, when you have I have so much stuff that, you know, then I feel like I could like give some to my artwork, you know. It's like, you know, like there's a point where, and I also feel that, you know, I get to use it, and then my artwork is gonna use it now. So there's like this hand-me-down, similar to the way that, you know, for example, I would find like a leather pant that belonged to somebody, and that it has like all this history. I feel like the objects that belong to me also carry over like some of my own personal history into the pieces.
And you're okay if someone buys the artwork and then takes it away, and you never own it again?
Exactly. They want to wear it.
When did you start creating the paprikas, and what was your inspiration?
I started creating collages, like you know, like Mothership, and they used to be more abstract. There used to be all just kind of like these networks and kind of like all this abstraction, because I'm also fascinated by abstraction, and you could see also in the work there's like this battle of like representational abstraction, and I was never really like satisfied with abstraction. I always wanted to have like this avatar, this alter ego, and the collage was giving me all these elements, right? All these eyes, all this like kind of like parts of things, and I felt that I needed to create something that was like recognizable, that you could recognize from one work to another. Also I felt that it was almost kind of like a vessel, like this character became a vessel where I could just like put in all of these obsessions and all these kind of interests of mine that I like, you know, live by, that I like every day, you know, kind of like, you know, I'm about. So it happened very naturally, and then it evolved into the character, and now it's like, you know, it's all about him, you know, it's her, you know, like, you know, this is just like every artwork becomes a pretext to do like another version of the character.
Well, thank you so much. I want to know what inspires your color combination.
Sometimes I'm looking at Instagram or something like that, and I like look at like a fashion show or something, and I always take like screenshots, and you know, I think like pink with orange or something like that, so it's very daring and stuff, and I always try to translate that into my work. So I think that all comes from like all these different sources, or also can come from like also like some art history painting, like in the case of here. So there's always like, I looked at everything. I don't really kind of like, you know, only look at art. I look at like a lot of different things to inspire the work, and I think you can tell that.
How do you deal with the ephemeral part of your installations, like in letting go of, you've created these just elaborate scenes and...
Oh yeah, and then they get taken apart.
And that I mean, I have a hard time with it. So like, how do you deal with it, or how does it move forward? Or you're photographing it and then maybe you're reusing it in material?
I think so. I think that, you know, since now we live in an era where everything is about the image that we looked at on Instagram, or that we have those professional image taken, I feel like, okay, now we're taking the picture, it's part of the archive, so now, you know, people get to enjoy it, and then when it comes down, well, it's time for it to come down. I think it's like something that, you know, I kind of like, as an installation artist, you kind of like have to like let go, and it's part of the process, it's part of how everything, you know, happens. And the nice thing about installations is that they're usually up for, some of them are up are up for like a long time. Like Mattress Factory was up for a year. Tesoro was up for 2 years. Here the Kemper is also going to be up for a year. So it's almost like they have a longer run sometimes.
Hi, Pepe. I just wanted to know, how sporadic is your development of your certain pieces? Because I can see that there's a lot going on, and that you're very good at doing collage. So I'd like to see, like, how do you develop a piece, or how does it start? What's the beginning of it?
Are you talking about the collage or the assemblage pieces, or
I just think, like,
just something like this?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think for this one, there was like a lot of preparation. So I think what happens is that for example, for this piece, I found a spring, then I did the ceramics in Mexico, then I went to markets in Mexico, and that was like really kind of like part of the excitement about the piece, like kind of like I was going to bring things from Mexico back to Miami, and that I was also going to find things in Miami. So there was also like, there's also like part of like the thing that drives my work is like this excitement of the find, of like actually like kind of like going to like kind of like a market, or like kind of like in Mexico, like I was going to these markets that were like entire city blocks and blocks, and like, you know, like it was like, and it was just like very exciting, and it's like kind of like almost like wake up in the morning and what's it going to be like, what I'm going to be finding, and what stuff I'm going to bring back home and stuff. And then at the factory, being able to make the ceramic cornucopias, that was also exciting, you know, like kind of like making something with my own hands, and you know, that was based on something that I found. So the cornucopias are based on I made a mold of a cornucopia that I found in Miami. So then that gets casted, and then it's almost like this, almost like I do like a lot of prepping, and then I bring everything into the studio, and I just think about it a lot, and then one day, just kind of like, you know, I sometimes I feel like, sometimes I place things together, and I kind of like, I'm afraid to start like kind of like putting things together, because I feel like maybe I should wait another day, maybe one day that I'm not, like, I really have to be in that mood for all these objects to start like dancing together, to start kind of like, you know, having this conversation. Yeah. Yeah.
Thanks. Hey, Pepe. So. Okay, so I get the part about the kiss. I'm trying to think back of all the times that I've ever felt that way. And Fabric and Hofmann, but I think everybody, you know, interprets this for themselves, right? But I was just curious, like when you think about the museum, you think about where we are in Kansas City, when you were thinking about this project, and if somebody is walking in here and experiencing that for the first time, how would you guide them to approach it?
To guide like somebody who just come into the museum and see this, I think first, I think I would like the person to experience it as a whole, and then maybe they start getting closer. I think you first see this thing, right, and it's kind of like hits you, right, because it's very big, and it's kind of like very colorful. But then you start discovering all these layers that the work has, and how it's made, and how it's got put together. So you have, for example, like the fabric and then you discover, for example, like I was talking to somebody who works here at the museum, and she mentioned to me that she discovered that print, the blueprint, it's a reproduction of some of the figures that are inside the box. So I think people are starting to discover all these connections, and then they figure some things out by themselves. But of course, then when you read the text, it gives you like another layer. But I think I really enjoy when people just intuitively kind of like come in and like starting discovering all this thing about the work. I mean, one time I had an exhibition, and this guy came into the room, and he walked into one of these boxes, and he just told me all these things about the work, and I was like blown away. I was like, oh wow, like this is amazing that you actually got all this thing from the work right away, and that you're actually like telling me. And it was just like it wasn't an art person, and that's why I really appreciated that somebody like came in and told me, oh, you're about this, you're about that, and it's like, so like you just hit me with all this kind of like very like precise kind of like, you know, things that I was thinking about the work.
How about another round of applause for Pepe Mar?